Welcome to Power Hour. Today we're going to talk about getting organized for the IEP process. Once again, a parent requested this, and it was a really fun topic to dive into because I think over the years I've developed my own organizational style and process, but looking back through it and really thinking about what would I want to tell someone made me think about it a little bit differently. So I'm going to cover a couple different aspects of organization today, and I really want you all to jump in and ask questions at any time. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded for our YouTube channel. So I'm Audrey Vernick, the Director of Patient and Family Advocacy of the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance. I'm sorry I didn't start with that. So when we think about getting organized for the IEP process, one of the things that I want to just make sure that everyone has a really strong foundation in is what is the IEP process. So oftentimes families come to me and they want to talk to me about placement. And I don't know if you guys can see on this list where placement is, but it's step number 5. And so the organization of documents and communications and whatnot are usually around step number 2 and step number 4. Those are kind of our big organizational needs. And we really need to start there. So I'm going to assume almost everyone who has a child who's had epilepsy surgery has gone through the process of referral to an IEP. But if you haven't, that would be the first step in the process. But step 2 is really the big one. And that's where we spend a lot of our time and energy. A lot of our webinars talk about that because it's so important. But then once you have that IEP developed, the next kind of most important thing would be that progress monitoring. So I'm going to show you some examples today about how to organize both around assessments and about progress monitoring, and also just organizing your files in general. So good records are essential for effective advocacy. I think we all know this. I have a terrible memory now. I'm 55, and over the years, my mind has started to go more and more, although I never had a great memory. And so it's really hard if you're in a meeting and you're trying to talk about something that was said or something that was agreed to or some program that you read about that would be really great for your child or some curriculum and you can't remember it. So the more organized you can be, the better. And I also find for me, I need to review my file before every meeting, before every letter that I write. Does that mean I read every single piece of paper? No, but I'm going to have a quick overview of what it is, skim my notes and then be prepared, write out my questions and be prepared that way. So this is really, really important. There's so many lists of what records parents should keep. This is my list, which is ultimately all encompassing because the second block there, copies of, includes pretty much everything. But I'll start with a log. So if you're not already creating a log of some sort with telephone calls, meetings, conversations, and correspondence with your school or school district, you might want to consider starting that. And one mantra in the special ed advocacy world is, if it wasn't in writing, it didn't happen, right? And you've probably heard me say in other trainings, let's say you bump into your principal in the hallway and they're like, oh, of course, we're going to give your child a one-to-one aid. We just discussed it last week and we're working out the details. You need to follow that up with a written email saying it was great chatting with you in the hallway and I just want to confirm what you said, and then you state it, right? So if you're not already keeping a log of some sort, again, it's hard to remember dates and what was said and who did you talk to and all of that. Doesn't mean you have to write out every single thing that was said, but I do have one parent actually who has a spreadsheet and copies the content of each email into the spreadsheet so that when she goes through and looks by date or topic or person, she can actually find the email. I think that's kind of an interesting way to approach it as well. So you could do this, and I'll explain today some options about how to organize on a notepad, in a binder, or digitally. There's lots of different, or there's probably an app for that I don't know about because I'm not as tech savvy as I'd like to be. But I use Google Docs for most of my organization. And if you're afraid of Google Docs, I would recommend getting to know it. I'm going to walk you through some uses for it today. Copies of everything, every single piece of paper that was ever written about your child. If you don't have a copy of it, get a copy of it. So if you don't have a written report of your child's surgery, get it. If you don't have a written report of the most recent MRI, get it. If you don't have a copy of the entire assessment and the responses that your child gave on every assessment that was done, get it. So you're entitled to every record in both the medical setting and the school setting about your child. So don't be afraid to ask for those records, because you can't create a complete file if you don't have that information. And also, you can't advocate for your child if you don't know everything that there is to know about your child, every detail. I had started working for the Brain Recovery Project, I think it was in 2015 or 2016. And Monica Jones, our founder and executive director, asked me about my son's surgery. And you know what? I had never read a surgical report. And so I had it. I had requested all the records from the hospital because we had surgery out of state. And I went back and read it. And I was a little surprised by some of the things I read. It was a little bit different than what I had remembered in my faulty memory, because by then it was, let's see, probably about 8 or 9 years since he had surgery. The other thing you might want to consider is starting to record every IEP meeting if you're in a state that allows recording. So some states require the consent of the other party, which means you ask and the school says no, and then you can't record unless the school agrees. That's called two-party consent. So usually if there's two-party consent, the school district will almost always say no, because they don't want you to have an accurate record of what was said, and because then you might hold them accountable to that, right? So, but if you're in a state that allows audio recording, then I would recommend that you start recording every IEP meeting and keeping those recordings. I use Otter AI now, which is a note-taking system that transcribes everything. I live by it. I don't know what I would do without it. And I like reviewing the transcripts, and that's what I use for my reference when I want to go back. If your school does not allow you to record your IEP meeting, I really recommend you bring a person, a friend, a neighbor, a teenager, someone who can take notes for you during the meeting, because it's really hard, I know for me, and emotional to be in an IEP meeting and then to try to be keeping track of what's being said and also engage in the conversation and not miss the flow. And so invite a friend. I have a friend here in the Bay Area, and she and another friend made a deal early on. They both have very, very medically complex children, but they go to each other's IEPs and they know each other's IEPs really well, and they take notes for each other, and it's worked out really well. So if you're not allowed to record the IEP meeting, and even if you are, having someone else go with you and kind of help you with that note taking can be really helpful. And lastly, you might consider starting to track violations now, or issues, you might call them. They might not truly be violations, but starting to keep track of all the things that they didn't do that they were supposed to do. The reason for this is that someday, if you decide you want to file due process on the district or request compensatory educational funds from the district for things that they didn't provide, if you have a list of every violation, both what are called procedural violations and substantive violations, it can help move along that conversation. Let's just say it makes a stronger case. So for example, did they give you written meeting notice with a list of all the attendees in advance? That's a procedural safeguard. And if you haven't read your parent procedural safeguards, I highly recommend you read it and understand it and look up all the things you don't know and learn about them. So if they didn't notify you of the meeting, if they said no to something and you asked for prior written notice, or even if you didn't ask for prior written notice and they didn't provide it, in Pennsylvania, this is called NORUP. So prior written notice is I'm PWN. I often talk in acronyms, and I think I am, but I wasn't in that case. But a NORUP is a notice of required educational, I can't remember what the P is for in Pennsylvania, I apologize. But anyway, so PWN or NORUP, if they refuse to initiate or change or et cetera, anything that you ask and they don't give you a PWN or a NORUP, that actually is another violation. I'm just trying to think of some basic procedural violations. Let's say they miss the timeline. Let's say the IEP is due May 1st and they don't have an IEP meeting till May 30th, right? So those things in the big picture don't really matter. But if you have that combined with your child missed 60 speech sessions this year and they used the wrong curriculum and they didn't make any progress on their goals, and you can then go to the school district or a hearing officer or however it's going to be and say, look, there are all these procedural violations. So not only they weren't crossing their T's and dotting their I's. And then there were all these substantive violations where they basically ultimately didn't provide FAPE or free and appropriate public education for my child. That now you have an attorney or hearing officer who's going to look at that, and you have a lot more standing in your case. You have a lot more strength in your case if it goes that way. We hope it will never happen, but you need to prepare. In some ways, you need to always prepare for IEPs as though you're preparing to go to hearing, because you never want to, but if you do and you don't have any documentation, you're getting nothing, and you're just not going to get anything. So some comments from the chat. I have a OneNote with every report, et cetera, in it. I can get to it from every device. Helps so much. I refer to it all the time. That's great. I use Google Docs for the same reason, or Google Drive. I can access it from every device, all of that. Is using Otter AI to dictate aloud if not in a two-party state? It depends. And so I would ask if it's an accommodation, if you had a disability as a parent and you needed to have the meeting recorded because of a disability that made it hard for you to fully participate in the meeting, it would be, then that would be an ADA accommodation, right? If your student is going to participate in the meeting and they need Otter AI so they can be reading the transcript while the team members are speaking, then now we're talking about an ADA accommodation, right? So then it would be allowed. But if you're just saying, I want to record it and I'm not going to tell the team, technically, no, that's not allowed. You need to notify another party of the intent to record, and they have to agree or disagree. So technically, no. And then another parent corrected me, the NORUP is Notice of Required Educational Placement. Thank you. And I just want to saying this for the recording for people who won't see the chat. All right. So when we think about organization, so that's just kind of the lay of the land, right? About just kind of broad strokes about things that we're thinking about when we create, or just going through the IEP process, and some details about note keeping and record keeping. So there are a number of resources out there. I'm going to share a few with you today. I'm also going to share these via email after today's training. So this Understood is a great website. If you haven't already been there, they have tons and tons and tons of great resources that I refer to all the time. And they have a great graphic designer who does nice, clean layouts, which I really like. So here's one example. This is their IEP binder checklist. I don't know if it's still up on their website, but I will attach it in case it's not available online. I'll include it in the follow-up resources that I'm providing for you. Hang on, now something popped up and I can't make it go away. Okay. Okay, so this is just an example of things that you might, and I talked about this communication. So that's that log, right? We're going to have a school log. And I'm going to show you some actual examples of this in my personal Google spreadsheet that you'll see at the end. Evaluations, the IEP itself, what parts of the IEP do you need to keep track of? And then the report cards, progress notes, sample work, and then behavior. There might be more, right? So in each organization kind of has a different checklist. So you can kind of look through each of these checklists and decide which is the most appropriate for you and which things you want to include. And I'll be including a document as well that has my own checklist in it. So it's going to be different for every person. So I think some people will say, but I'm not a Google Docs person, or I'm not organized. And this, you can see what a mess this is. This is actually my son's current file box. It's right behind me over there. It's always front and center, right? And he's out of high school. He doesn't have an IEP anymore, but I called his IEPs. I put everything in kind of the back storage area. But these are the things that we're working on right now. So as you can see, we've got paratransit. We've got Medi-Cal, which is our state Medicaid. You can't read that, but there's Department of Rehabilitation. Then I have a transition folder that includes his last functional vocational evaluation, his last neuropsych, and a lot of all of his last assessments that he had in his junior and senior year of high school that I will still be referencing probably for a number of years. And we're about to have a conversation actually later today with our Department of Rehabilitation, which is our state vocational rehabilitation, because he's not getting appropriate vocational training. So we're pushing on that. So I resent them his last functional vocational evaluation and his neuropsych evaluation with a note saying, look at page this, this, and this, because it talks about how he needs X, Y, and Z. And that's what I'm going to be asking for today. So even after his IEP has ended, I still have a need for some sort of system of organization. I have a file drawer that has other things in it, like our special needs trust, all the ABLE account information, our wills, our his advanced healthcare directive, which is ultimately superseded by the conservatorship that we also have, all of that stuff. So that's also nearby, but I don't need to access that as regularly. So it's not in the open file folder. So what I show this to you because it can be messy. I just want you to appreciate how messy this is. It's not neat and pretty like you see in a lot of the pictures. So this is from Pacer Center. And again, I'll share the link to all of this in the resources I share with you. They actually will send you a set of folders that are about special education record keeping, which I thought was kind of neat. And each one, they talk about different things that you might want to include. So again, just more information, more details about how to do this. I do all of this digitally, but you might prefer to do it in folders. So I think you pay $5 or $10, I can't remember how much it was, and they will send you all of these folders, and then they come in a little plastic carrying case. So you can have it all in one place. I found pretty quickly that my son, his paperwork exploded out of a little small carrying case into the binder of epic proportions, right? And many of you probably have a binder of epic proportions. And over the years, what I would do is call out anything that was old and just kind of keep the most current stuff, but it was still the largest binder you can buy, basically. So anyway, here's just some more examples of the folders, report cards and state and district test scores. If you're not keeping track of this, very important. Any other important records, especially health issues, health-related information, and behavior and discipline, et cetera. Attendance can also be a factor. If your child has frequent illnesses and they're due to their disability or their medical condition, and they're being penalized for that. And then, awards and schoolwork. So I also want to always focus on the positive. We spend a lot of time focusing on what the child can't do and what their disabilities are, their healthcare issues are. I think it's really important to say, at the beginning of every school year, I would go into my child's IEP meeting and say, this summer, my son went scuba diving, or he went on a trapeze or whatever, or he went horseback riding or whatever crazy thing we tried to get him to do with one hand. And he always did willingly. And these were the accomplishments he's had. And these are the strengths he has, right? So it's not always about the challenges. This is another example of folders that they have just for regular educational school record keeping. So they're very similar with probably some slight differences. So you can order those from Pacer Center. Now here's an example of my Google Drive. This is the current one. So it looks a little different than it would under when he was younger. But so this is, what you see on the right is the IEP folder, and within it is a year for every IEP, right? And so I have, and I list whether or not it's a triennial. You'll notice he had a triennial in 2018 and 2020. I just want to point that out because I didn't want to wait until his senior year. I wanted to do his triennial in his junior year. So we pushed up his triennial. And I also wanted to do adult normed assessments and make sure he had a second transition assessment. We did the first one in 2018, et cetera. So you can change the timing of your triennials with, upon parent request for a valid reason, and it was a valid reason. And so each individual folder, I'm not going to go through them, but they all have whatever I had from the IEP. So the recordings, the emails back and forth, the IEP itself, et cetera. And I'm going to show you a little more detail. But if you look on the left side, now we have a folder called Adult Service Agencies, because my son is 19. He doesn't have an IEP anymore. So I pulled this IEP folder area over here to show you. But if your child is in middle or high school, you should be starting to create the Adult Service Agency folder make sure you're starting to make those connections with adult service agencies as young as possible. So my son is legally blind because he has homonymous hemianopia. So he's connected with several blind and low vision organizations. He has done summer programs with them that were funded by our state vocational rehabilitation center, and that gave him job training skills and all of that. He did a couple summers at a program called CIP, which is the College Internship Program, and they are all over the US, but there happens to be one in Berkeley. And what that really is, it's not a college program at all. It's a terrible name, but it's a transition living skills program. He did a training on his vocational and ADA rights with our Disability Rights California. So if you have a disability rights org in your state, I think every state has one. That's something to start looking into. Sometimes the school district doesn't offer robust vocational training for our children. And so finding it through other means. And it was really just about like, what can an employer ask me about? What do I have to disclose about my disability? What if I need to sit down on the job? What if I have a seizure? Like all the things that might happen on the job that training did. DOR is our Department of Rehab. GGRC is our regional center. That's a California state thing. So you might look into what your home and community-based service waiver program is for your state. HCBS, that's under Medicaid. IHSS is another state thing that's funding for the caregiver to take care of the individual with a disability. And then he does have Medi-Cal or Medicaid. OTTP was another program I found when he was a freshman, I think, in high school, which was the OT transition program. It's only in San Francisco, but it is a program that with an OT who specialized in transition age youth working on transition related skills. So we worked with her for a couple of years. He now has Paratrans that we're applying to SSI, and then I have another folder just with other transition programs. Then I also have a college folder. I also have a documents for adulthood folder, which I will send you a checklist for the documents for adulthood that you might need. I think that's also from pacer.org, so you can check that out. I have a healthcare folder for him. School has all the old school stuff. Then I have lots of other transition planning guides and resources. Cards is literally every ID card, insurance card, everything, his passport, everything that he might need, password protected. And then I have an estate planning folder. So you can see it's going to be different depending on where you are in the process. If your child is 3, you're going to have a different set of folders and information that you're sharing. And then, excuse me. This is for a client that I worked with actually. And this is their folder for their school district. And so you can see how, because I didn't show you what was in each individual IEP folder. So in each year, I might have a folder, or I might not be for every year, but it depends on how you want to break it out. But so assessments and requests for assessments, state complaint, because this family had filed state complaints several times against the district. Distance learning plans, which came up during COVID, that they created these separate documents. Docs this was just like general documents that we didn't know where else to put. Draft letters and template letters. So this was anything that was like useful that they could use as a template. Some of our model letters from Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance that you can find on our website, et cetera. ESY, which is extended school year. Historical documents. So these were things that we felt like we needed to keep, but we weren't ready to throw away. And then IEP goals, notes, and IEP goals, notes, and parent concerns. And I think recordings were also in there. So that's everything related to the IEP meeting itself and IEP planning. Literacy was a big issue for this family. So we had a lot of documentation around there. There were some other notes. The progress notes and the report cards had their own folder. There were also a lot of protocols and plans for this student because he was nonverbal. So there were lots of visual schedules, visual checklists, what to do in an emergency. Like if there's an active shooter drill and you have a student that can't keep quiet, what's the protocol? He actually had a backpack with like sensory and quiet tools for if that were to happen, that sort of thing. So all those, and stretching protocols, all of that was in that. Prior written notices and emails, and then records. There have been so many records requests on this child because of issues with the district. So we put them all in that folder. A settlement, which ultimately happened, and then looking into transition programs. So I'm getting a question about what do you do with emails? Do you keep them as Google Docs then? So it depends on how you have your settings on your system. So if you have your settings that your emails are deleted after a certain period of time with the school district, make sure you're keeping them for at least 2 years. You can't go back more than 2 years in technically you can't go to hearing or get a settlement for something outside of 2 years. However, sometimes there's a history that has been much longer that can lend color to the case. And a lot of hearing officers and judge and whatnot will listen to information that was pre that 2 years. So if your system deletes emails after a year, you might want to download and save emails as PDFs. That's one way to do it. I think that's what this parent did. Very important, especially if, I had a parent recently who said, we asked the principal to do X that was written in the IEP. It wasn't happening. There was something written in the IEP that wasn't happening. And it was the stupidest thing. I think it was giving work to be sent home because the child has chronic fatigue issue and couldn't go to school. And the team agreed that all the work would be sent home. She could do the work at home in the morning without having to rush to get out the door, and then would come later in the day. But no one was giving the work. And so she kept trying with the teachers, would show up at different times a day, all of that. Nothing was happening. Finally, and it was in the IEP that this was supposed to happen, finally emailed the principal and said, can you please help me with this? And she says, no, I won't do that. So that's the email you want to print and have it etched in gold, right? That was they won their settlement on that email because the principal said, no, I won't do that. about something that was written in the IEP. So do you need every single email? Maybe not, right? If it's my son's orthotic is broken, can you fix it? And the PT is responding, yeah, I'll be there on Thursday to check in. You might keep it until Thursday to make sure she checked in, right? But once that task, that item is done, you might delete it. But if it's I'll get there when I can, and it gets dragged out and it never happens, and the PT fails to do something they were supposed to do, you want to have a record of that. So I personally don't download PDFs. I have my settings on my email that I save all my emails, and I pay for the extra storage because to me it's worth it rather than spending the time downloading PDFs. Hope that answers the question. Okay, so here's another fun, again, there's so many resources out there and I'm trying not to give you too many, but this is also from Understood. This is called What to Double Check on Your IEP. So again, just another thing, another checklist to kind of look through. I'm not going to go through this, but it will be included in the resources I send you today. And then another great resource is A Day in Our Shoes. She goes by A Day in Our Shoes and Don't IEP Alone. This is Lisa Leitner. She's in Pennsylvania. She actually has a child who had brain surgery for epilepsy. And she's a parent advocate, and she has a Facebook group, lots of resources, but she has this IEP toolkit with all of these individual documents. She agreed to let me share a few of these with you today to just give you some idea of what's in that bundle that you would get. So she gives you all of these things, all the individual pieces that you can print out and to create your organizational system. If you like that, I think you can also use them digitally, if I'm not mistaken. So these are just, again, some ways to organize your system. You're going to decide what works for you. She has a sample worksheet for parents. So again, I said I like to review my file and make my list of questions so that when I go in that meeting, I know what I want to talk about. So that's what she's doing here. She's saying, what are my main areas of concern for today's meeting? So when I walk into a meeting, what are my top 3 things that I have to talk about? And I don't let the meeting, I always say parent concerns are coming first. I let the team know in advance. I usually give them in writing, say these are the 3 things I want to talk about first. So in this case, she gives example of SDIs, which is specially designed instruction, which can be accommodations, modifications, et cetera, that are not working and not working. What's the present level of performance? So even if it's a mid-year IEP, you still want to know where the child is, right? If they had a goal that was written in September and it's February and the child has made no progress on the goal, that's a conversation to have, right? We don't need to wait until the annual to have that. What about test scores? Maybe this school district testing or state testing just came back and showed that your child was below basic in all areas. That might be a conversation to have. And then anything you need more explanation on. Because remember, parent participation is tantamount to the IEP process. When Congress reauthorized the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, in 2004, they re-emphasized the parent participation portion, and is a violation if the school does not allow the parent to participate fully. You can't participate if you don't understand something. So anytime you ask for explanation, if they say no, again, put that in your little issues or violations checklist, like ask for explanation on what this meant and was refused and couldn't participate, right? No parent participation. And then things like, what does next year look like? Is there a transition happening? And then any medications and side effects. This is a great little checklist. What about a parent-teacher conference checklist and report card dates? If you're not getting report cards and progress reports on goals every report card period, that's a problem. That's also a violation. We can talk a little bit more about that. And then she has lots of just little IEP actions and activities that should be happening, a timeline, what parent action was required, a due date, et cetera. So if you were to create like a issues or violations spreadsheet, it might be looking something like this, although you might also have the name of the individual, the date that the conversation happened, et cetera. So here's just some example of different things. This would be a good checklist for, like, when you think about beginning preparation for the next IEP meeting. Is it a reevaluation year? Have you written your parent concerns letter? Even IEP meeting prep, like, do you need to take time off work? Do you need to organize a babysitter? Do you need to plan an agenda, et cetera? All of that. I found preparing for IEP meetings to be pretty time consuming because I would write a pretty detailed letter of parent concerns. I would share it with my husband. He would have his input. And sometimes we would even share it with other people that worked with him and say, what are we missing? Like, we've had trusted PTs over the years. We've had trusted psychologists, neuropsychologists. So whoever was kind of in our inner circle at the moment where we felt this person really knows our child the best, they might weigh in on it as well. So there's a lot of prep that can go into it. Here's another IEP meeting checklist, also created by Lisa Leitner, A Day in Our Shoes, and you can get all of her resources online. So that just some things that you might go through before the meeting. So I want to just quickly talk about progress monitoring. So while the topic of this was how to get organized, if you're not getting organized around progress monitoring, that is going to be a problem. And so progress monitoring, all it means is tracking progress on your child's IEP goals. So you're monitoring progress. So I didn't really understand what progress monitoring was for a long time. And I didn't think it was anything I had anything to do with, because I'm the parent and the school's going to monitor progress, right? I don't need to monitor progress. The school's going to do that. And they're going to tell me how my child's doing. No. So if you are not monitoring your child's progress with great detail and asking for data to back up everything they're saying, then you could potentially have a problem. So here's another example, IEP goal tracker. This is from Understood. So they show you a blank one. And then again, I'll share these with you. And then here's one that has some examples in it. So the goal would be the student will increase her reading comprehension from 70 to 90% on late second grade passages. And then there should be a present level of performance. It might be called the baseline that shows where she was when that goal was written. Recent measures show that Katie is able to read early second grade passages at a rate of 40 words per minute with 80% accuracy and 70% text comprehension. And the benchmarks, if there are any, would be after being taught new vocabulary with no more than 2 adult prompts while reading, she will correctly answer questions about late second grade text. So you can see in the benchmark, it talks about no more than 2 adult prompts and pre-teaching the new vocabulary, right? So those are the givens, like given pre-teaching of new vocabulary and 2 adult prompts, then she will correctly answer the questions. So let's say she gets 100%, great. Now let's do it without being pre-taught, without the prompts, right? So you have to think about how those are going to go up. And then those might be your observations and questions for the school. Why can't Katie remember the vocabulary words? What can I do to help her at home? Since she's in 3rd grade, when will she be able to move to 3rd grade text, et cetera? So you're thinking about what questions you want to ask. A Day in Our Shoes also has a goal tracker. I think this comes in the bundle if you buy her bundle. Again, you're looking at what is the goal? What are the steps to achieving the goal? What are the present levels? When is the goal starting and ending? Who's responsible for it? And then you're looking at the progress updates for each quarter or reporting period. And this is our IEP goal tracker. You can go to our website, the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance website, and I can't remember exactly where this is on our website, so I apologize, but you might be able to just search IEP goal tracker and find it. And if you just go there, you'll just see, you won't see this drop down because there's actually a little arrow that you have to hover over. And if you're not familiar with Google Docs, you might not know to do that. But what I did was I hovered over it and then did the screenshot. So you're looking at what is the functional category. Basically, what you want to make sure that everything's covered in your child's IEP as well. So which of these areas is this area of need addressing? So you might check vision, and then the area of need might be visual processing, and then the goal might be Bennett will pull out relevant text information on a worksheet with a busy background, given no more than 1 verbal prompt and extra time to complete the task by the end of this reporting period or something like that. The special education is what does he need to get there? So then we'd be describing, is there going to be one-on-one support with the special education teacher, et cetera. The supplementary aids and services would also be like, so then now we're looking at accommodations, modifications, and services that might be supporting it, related services. We're also going to want to look at the progress reports. Goal met is really important because I think this is something that often gets missed in IEP meetings where they'll start let's talk about the new goals. Great. New year, new goals. Let's do it. And no one ever talks about the old goals. So if you're not starting your annual IEP meeting with a discussion of last year's goals and whether or not your child made progress on the goal and how much, and if the goal was, Lisa will cross the street with 15 people around her and 5 verbal prompts and pre-screening the map route, et cetera. And then they're like, great, she met this goal at 100%. It's like, okay, now she needs to meet it without 15 people around her and without 5 verbal prompts and without all of that, right? So you want to really be understanding when they say the goal was met, what was met? Was it met functionally or was it met in one very isolated structured setting? So you want to be able to take the goal out of that isolated structure setting and generalize it across settings. So when they say a goal was met, if it's not generalized across settings, it's not functionally met. So really, really, really important. If all of your child's IEP goals are not met year after year, then they're not providing FAPE. They're not providing a free, appropriate public education. They're violating your child's educational rights, right? That's not FAPE. So then you need to have a conversation with a special education advocate or an attorney and figure out what you need to do. There's a comment in the chat, sorry. And we're not at the end yet, don't worry. I've started to make them send me copies of any samples of work that is used to measure goals. I have found many errors in grading or samples that were used to measure that didn't fit the criteria for the goal. Exactly, right? So just because they do something doesn't mean they're doing it accurately. And then the other thing to note is that they have to give you every single piece of data that they capture about your child. Every single piece of data captured about your child, they have to share. So if they are, when in the goal, it will say something like as measured by, and if it says teacher records or running log or whatever, ask to see it, right? If they say, right, if the goal is measured by writing samples, you should be asking for all those copies of all those writing samples or the actual writing samples every single time you meet to discuss progress. And one other thing on progress is progress has to be reported at a minimum as at the same time as the report cards are provided to students in the school. So quarterly, trimestrally, and in rare cases, twice a year, once a semester, which I think is terrible. But for your child, they might require more frequent progress reporting, right? Your child might require progress reporting every month or every 6 weeks, right? So that's a conversation to have with the IEP team and say, we need to determine if this is the right curriculum, program, whatever for my child. And if we wait a year or 3 months, it's going to be too long, right? So let's look at how soon can we see data on this new methodology you want to introduce, or, whatever, or any goal that the child maybe wasn't making sufficient progress on, and ask for every 4 to 6 weeks to see progress. And then you're asking for all the data they're collecting on that as well. We can go back to progress if we have time at the end. We're going to do Julie Gardner and I. Julie Gardner is the educational specialist at Kennedy Krieger, who's done a couple power hours with me. She and I are going to do a 2-part series, I think in the fall, on goals and progress reporting. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. All right, so this is actually my spreadsheet. I cleaned it up a little bit for you to remove all the names, I hope. What I do here, this was like the dates of assessments and the timeline. So I'm looking at when was the last IEP signed, who signed it, when is the annual due? So what is my due date? When is the triennial due? Was I provided prior written notice, and what was the date? The date I requested the assessments, the date I received the assessment plan, the date I signed the assessment plan, and then the date, that would be the date the assessments are due. And then these are all the assessments. Oops, I'm seeing a couple names on here, sorry. Sorry. I don't think it really matters, but so I'm asking for an academic assessment. My son was at a non-public school at the time, so anything that says on NPS, it just means non-public school, the private school he was attending with his IEP there. So the non-public school did some things and the school district did some things, just the way our district works. And also some services, like there was no orthopedic impairment specialist at the non-public school. So that's why the district orthopedic impairment specialist would do that. AT, audiological, functional, vocational, HAT, which is hearing assistive technology for his FM system, because they kept saying he didn't need it. And I said, well, let's do some testing to see his health, emergency seizure response plan, OT, orientation and mobility, PT and motor development, psychoed, post-secondary, reading, SLP, and then social emotional. And then also I had some assessments that I had done privately that I provided to the school. So I had a neuropsychological assessment done, I had a vision assessment done, and I had a CAPD and hearing evaluation done. I'm not going to get into the details about who does what assessment and why, because it's not the focus of today's talk, but I did track that. And then the team had access to all of this too. I didn't keep any of this secret. It was like, everyone has access to this document. Let's work together on it, right? I really want it to be a team. So as you can see, I made I signed the assessment plan on 3/5/20. So during that spring was when I was gathering all of this data. We ended up holding his triennial in the fall of 2020. That's how long it took to pull all this together. The other thing I did was I created a list of every assessor and their email. So this was every single person. You can see 31, sorry, not 31. It would have been 29 individual people assessed my son for his triennial, his last triennial. And then, so it was email address, which I removed all those, and then notes about different things, right? So they might, this person might not have done a full eval, but they observed and reviewed records. I wanted the school district educational audiologist to see that private evaluation I got from the private audiologist, right? So I put the note there for that. And then I agreed to obtain, that was from for the emergency plan, et cetera. So you get the idea here, right? And then now we're in the assessments. This is kind of an unwieldy spreadsheet. I'm going to just make it really small so you can kind of see how massive it is. And I'm just going to scroll through it. So this was a project. This was like, if you like knitting or doing anything really tedious, you might like doing a task like this. But I'm kind of a nerd and I love data. And I think data tells the story, right? And I think a lot of times you walk into these IEP meetings and they say, your child is doing so great. We're really proud of her progress on blah, blah, blah. And let's write this crappy goal and call it a day. And that happened a lot to me and I didn't want that. So what I did was, and this was his triennial, and it was his last triennial of high school. And I felt like this one of all really mattered. And I had done this before, by the way. So what I did was I took each area of assessment and which test it was and who administered it and the date. And I put what this should be in red, because everything that's below 85, I think I put in red. I wanted to highlight to the team and say this was an issue. Actually, probably everything on this sheet was something I had a concern about. So we're looking at math from the school, we're looking at math from the neuropsychologist, and we're seeing some red flags here, right? Anything below 80 in most school districts on a standard score will be considered, and I'm also showing you how to use Google Docs as we work here, right? Or Google Sheets. And if you don't know, there's videos. You can go to YouTube. You can learn how to do everything in Google Drive on YouTube. My son has taught me that anything I want to know, I can find how to do on YouTube. Kind of scary. But anyway, so I was tracking his actual scores. And then I have highlighted things. Like this was actually from a research study that was done at our pediatric epilepsy surgery conference. And I took some of their data and put it in this spreadsheet to share and say, well, she said he was I think he was in 9th grade when this testing was done, 8th or 9th grade, but his grade level equivalent at that time, GE equivalent, was 4.7. So that was something I wanted to highlight to the team and say, well, why is that so low, right? And has that improved? We don't have a current measure on this. Let's take a look at that. And then I had comments, lots of comments on the subtests and scores. For example, if they couldn't do a subtest for some reason, or if they highlighted certain things like strength and phonemic awareness, which is really surprising for a kid with auditory processing disorder, but he did have a strength in that area, one of the few significant strengths there. His standard score in reading through the school district was 59. That's very, very low. So any standard score below 80 or 85 is going to be considered problematic. We can talk about scores when we do our goals and progress monitoring, et cetera. So just to give you, this is just really to give you an idea. This one, it was like when the score went down over different times. And I want to, so it also helped me to really look at, well, what is it that all these tests are measuring? Like, and what are all these tests that they're doing? And do I know what they even measure? And what is it that, so like in the report, it said, indicates an underlying strength in symbol imagery, the ability to accurately visualize words and the letters within the words in the mind's eye. And so what does that mean? So then this was something I wanted to talk to the team about and said, can you explain this to me a little more? And how does this work in a real life setting? So again, I'm not going to read through all of this, but this was all the concerns I had. So for example, I had a private OT evaluate him in 2013, and she listed all of these areas of concern, postural skills that were diminished, issues with equilibrium and balance, problems with midline, rotating around the core, like all these things. So I wanted to bring this back to the team and say, hey, is this going to be evaluated? What are we going to look at? So I literally have every single assessment that he had done in every single area, cognitive ability, all of that, neuropsych, memory, the OT, everything, speech, sensory, verbal learning and memory, the whole 9 yards. So it was helpful for me. You might find it a little bit daunting. And then because he was about to go, I'm going to make this a little smaller again. He was about to go into transition. So what I did was I found every single transition assessment that is typically done. Sorry, I'll make it a little bigger now so you can read it. And I stuck it in here. And I have a link to it so we can look up what it is. And I asked the team, which of these assessments are you planning to do? Because this is transition time. So here's the employment ones. And here are the independent living ones. So you get the idea. So I had it all in one place. Remember, if you don't go in prepared for battle, right, this is your sword and your shield. You need your tools when you walk in. And a lot of these, if not all of them, are on our assessments spreadsheet. If you don't already have access to that, I'll share that today. All right, so now I'm going to show you just a sample spreadsheet that I used for him. And let me just make this a little, I want to make sure I see all the columns. That's what I'm trying to do. All right, Apple plus and Apple minus, or Command plus and Command minus for those of you who don't know how to do this. So again, this was just what assessments do we want? So areas of assessment, what do we know about the student? What assessments are planned? What comments and recommendations? And what are the parent concerns? So again, this was just for me. It was like a worksheet for me. These are the areas I want to make sure they cover. The vision statement was, what is his vision? What does he want to do? The law says that's an essential part of transition. So I wanted that in there. What intelligence testing will be done? Achievement, school performance. What about post-secondary education? Self-determination, emotional, behavioral, social skills, personal preferences, functional life skills, community participation, leisure, recreation, vocational career. Oh, work readiness, situational, vocational, and assistive technology. So there's not a lot in here because this was really more of a question, but I brought this to the team and said, how we'll be assessing in all these areas. So next we get the really super overwhelming spreadsheet. And I don't mean to overwhelm you, but there's quite a lot in here. Actually, this is not too bad. I think I took some stuff out. So again, what's the goal area? What's the baseline? These were sort of proposed goals. So baseline, I want to just back up to that. If you don't have a good baseline or present levels, you can't write a goal. So if you don't know what your child's baseline or the present level is that they're basing the goal on, you have to ask for one. And I actually had a team this year in the fall had written a goal, and parent and I could not understand the goal at all. We asked the team about it. We said, what's the baseline? What can you do right now? And they're like, oh, we have no idea. And I said, why don't you measure that and come back to us the next meeting? And once you have a baseline, we can write the goal, because you can't write a goal without a baseline. So this is my writing. This is not the school team now, right? This is still me saying, this is what I think is important. I think he needs support in the following areas, right? This is an idea of a goal. This is research on self-determination and self-advocacy. This is who I think the provider would be. Again, this is my example, right? This is not, the school is not doing this. This is my suggestion. So now let's get into, I think this is more now getting into what the school and I were having this conversation together. So mathematics and geometric reasoning. This was his math goal number 1. This was the baseline. This was by the school. He's able to identify key information, but hasn't been introduced to geometric word problems. And he can become frustrated when he doesn't immediately understand a concept and struggles with appropriately identifying his frustrations without place. Do you see how that baseline is not just mathematic? It's also the frustration is based on I think the visual processing, and I think his autism. There's a rigidity and some anxiety, right? But that's related to his ability to make progress in this goal. So it was part of the baseline. So then the goal was, when given direct instruction word problems involving blah, 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 geometric things, he will identify the pertinent information, formulate a plan for solving the problems, right? And solve a formula with 80% accuracy. And then we had some notes, right? I had stuck these in from Dr. Neuropsychologist. She had made a comment about his visual spatial skills and it may lead to distress and cognitive overwhelm. So I put that right in there. And again, I was sharing this spreadsheet with the school team and asking each tagging providers. So the way to, well, I'm not going to teach you how to do everything, but you can very easily tag someone. You just make a comment in the box and then you do @ and then now that person's tagged. You just use their email address, etc. So I was tagging providers in this spreadsheet. So again, I'm not going to go through all of it. It's too much, but you get the idea of different goal areas, and then comments, notes, etc. So really, really detailed. And then just going back a little, this was from 2018. So this was a couple of years earlier. This is closer to what our goal, our example goal spreadsheet is, what we share online, where we have a goal area, the date of usually the date of the IEP, meaning what I often have the page number or the goal number, depending on how you find things. Again, always a baseline, always a goal. How are they evaluating it? The Common Core domain, because goals should really be tied to the Common Core. I don't know, the domain area, and then the Common Core standard, who's providing it. And then you want to be tracking progress. So you have the first benchmark, because we have 3 reporting periods in our district, and I was not asking for additional progress reporting on my child at this time. So you have the comment for each reporting period. And then you have, was the goal met or not met? So for example, right here in the annual review, he needs further training on programs that might help him with producing math. So I want to pull right out of that progress note from that provider and write a goal that is involved in getting exposure to different programs that might help him in producing work in math. And guess what? Next year we had a goal that looked like that. Okay, so I'm going to drop out of this one. Are there any questions? One last sheet that I have in mind is accommodations. So I list every accommodation that might be needed by area of need, basically, which area. It's not, may or may not be how it's listed in the IEP itself. But so there's quite a lot in here again, especially for attention and task compliance and memory deficits, which are the 2 biggest areas we see after epilepsy surgery. These are the issues where we tend to have a lot of problems. But so anyway, this was just another sheet that I had. And I have one more sheet that I'll quickly show you. And please feel free to ask me any questions if you have them. And then let's just see here if I can get to the other. This was another, just slightly different. And you'll see it looks a little different because this parent liked to lay it out a little differently. So what they had was the area of need. Really important here, they linked to the old goal number. So whenever we were talking about the new goal, we always were really referencing the old goal. And we actually have in here what it was. Here's the standard I was talking about. So it was a grade 5. So the number there, the first number is the grade level, RF 5.3. So it was a 5th grade literacy goal. And then here it says in the goal itself, sorry, making this weird. Let me see if I can highlight this. CM recognizes that this is not a high school state standard. However, there is no foundational skills standard in high school, and this standard is the most appropriate. So CM is case manager. So this is important to remember as your kids get older. If there's not an appropriate Common Core standard that you can align a goal with because the child is not at that level, you can use a previous Common Core standard from a previous grade level, whatever it is that your child needs to make progress. But sometimes you can do both. You could find the 5th grade standard, and there's probably, my guess is there was something in this child's grade level standards that they could have tied in, right? And then like this was, everything in red is sort of our comments that we were giving the team. So for persons responsible for the goal, they had school staff, and our comment was literacy goals should be addressed by at least a special education teacher, if not a literacy specialist, right? So again, and this was something we worked with on the team, with the team together. So they saw all of this. There were no secrets, right? So all the notes and comments from, there was a summer tutoring report. So we have all of her comments in blue. We had a literacy consultant specialist, all of her comments in green. Our comments were in red. And then we have all the different progress reports, and we have comments about the progress reports. So they said goal met receptively. Objective 2 expressively. And our question was, what percentage of accuracy for the expressive 2-letter blends? This was, you guys might have heard me talk about this, and I will talk about it a lot in our progress monitoring webinar, but this teacher didn't know how to write progress reports. And so we taught her because she was writing progress reports that had nothing to do with the baseline or the goal as it was written or the objectives. So we had to teach her how to write progress reports. But anyway, you get the idea. Here it was like, does it seem like he went backwards from the previous progress report? It seems like a developmental leap from recognizing a sight word versus spelling a word is not possible yet. How does he make that leap, etc. Things like this, no progress to report. Let's see what else is on here that might be interesting. Recommendations, any comments on new goals? Let's see, we did have proposed new goals. Unfortunately, they're not in this on this tab. I apologize. But again, on this document, we also had, this is the way this person's accommodations were laid out. So they had the area of need on the left, program accommodation here, and then who recommended it and when. So Dr. Expert recommended this, literacy specialist recommended this, et cetera. What was it? And then we didn't get very far in that. Let me just see if there's another example here. I think that's probably it. I can stop on this and I'll stop sharing this. Actually, let me go back to this slide. And that's it. I'm gonna stop the recording now. Thank you so much for being here. And if anyone wants to stay on with any questions outside of the recording, you may. Thank you.